I'm a lonely widower, and the garden my late wife and I built together is my only joy. But my new, younger neighbor called it an eyesore and reported me to the Homeowners Association. They gave me 30 days to tear it all down. I had given up all hope until one Saturday morning when I looked out my window and saw an army on my lawn. First, I'd love to know, what is your favorite flower? Let me know in the comments. And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head to that garden. My wife, Eleanor, used to say that a garden was a conversation between a person and the earth. In the 2 years since she's been gone, our garden has become the only place I can still hear her voice. It is not a neat and tidy garden. Eleanor did not believe in neat and tidy. She believed in what she called beautiful chaos. It is a wild and vibrant and profoundly alive English-style cottage garden, a riot of climbing roses and tall purple lavender, and cheerful, unruly wildflowers that spill out over the neat suburban property lines. Every morning, I come out here with my cup of coffee. I talk to her. I tell her about my day. I ask her advice on where to plant the new daisies. The neighbors, I am sure, think I am a crazy old man muttering to his roses. But I do not care. In this small, green, and fragrant patch of the world, she is not gone. She is everywhere. This garden is not a hobby. It is my sanctuary. It is the last living piece of her that I have left. The house next door had been empty for a year. And then, last month, the for sale sign came down, and the new neighbor arrived. His name was Kyle. He was a young man in his 30s, a financial analyst of some kind, with an expensive, sterile-looking silver sports car and a profound belief in the power of minimalism. His house and his yard quickly became a reflection of his own personality. The charming old colonial was painted a stark, institutional gray, and his yard, he tore out every flower, every bush, and replaced it with a perfectly flat, perfectly green, and utterly, completely, and soul-crushingly boring carpet of manicured lawn. Our first conversation happened over the low privet hedge that separated our two properties. I was on my knees, tending to Eleanor's beloved and notoriously unruly patch of black-eyed Susans. "Morning," I had said, with a warm, neighborly smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood." He just looked at me, and then his gaze drifted, with a look of undisguised distaste, to my garden. "Thanks," he had said, his voice a cool, flat thing. "I was just admiring your foliage." He did not say it as a compliment. He said it the way an exterminator might admire a particularly large termite nest. "Quite the jungle you've got going on there," he'd added, before turning and walking back into his gray, silent house. The injustice, when it began, was not a single loud declaration of war. It was a quiet, passive-aggressive campaign of 1,000 small cuts. It was in the way he would loudly use a leaf blower to blast any fallen petals from my rose bushes back onto my side of the lawn. It was in the way I would overhear him on his phone in his backyard, talking to his friends about the crazy old man next door and the eyesore of a garden that was destroying the property values of the entire street. I tried to ignore him. I tried to retreat deeper into my own quiet world of flowers and memories. I told myself that his opinion did not matter, but his quiet, constant disapproval was a slow-acting poison, a gray, creeping weed that was beginning to choke the joy from my one last and most precious sanctuary. And I knew with a sad and weary certainty that the real battle, the one for the very soul of my wife's garden, was still to come. I had no idea it would arrive so soon. In a crisp, white, and very official-looking envelope.
The days that followed my neighbor Kyle's over her declaration of war were a quiet, slow-burning torture. My garden, my sanctuary, the one place in the world where I still felt a connection to my late wife, Eleanor, was now a source of a new and deeply felt anxiety. Every time I went outside to tend to her roses, I could feel his eyes on me from his cold, gray, and minimalist house. I could feel his silent, palpable disapproval. The joy I had once found in the simple, honest work of my hands was beginning to be choked out by the creeping, invasive weed of his judgment. I knew it was only a matter of time. And then, 1 week later, the official declaration arrived. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope tucked into my mailbox, with the embossed, soulless logo of the Westwood Meadows Homeowners Association in the corner. I sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where Eleanor and I had shared 1,000 cups of coffee, and I read my sentence. The language was a cold, impersonal legalese. It cited Kyle's formal complaint. It listed my violations. Violation of Covenant 7.4, unkempt foliage extending beyond designated planting beds. Violation of Guideline 12.2, non-uniform lawn and garden appearance, inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. My wife's beautiful, chaotic, and lovingly tended garden, her life's work, had been reduced to a series of bureaucratic infractions. The letter concluded with the final, killing blow. I had 30 days to rectify the violations, a corporate euphemism for destroy your wife's memory, or I would begin to face a series of escalating, punitive, daily fines. I just sat there, the letter in my hand, and I felt the last of the fight go out of me. The old George, the man who had built a business from scratch, the man who had fought for his country, he would have fought this. He would have gone to the HOA meetings. He would have hired a lawyer. He would have relished the battle. But that man had died in a quiet and profound way the day he had lost his Eleanor. I was just a tired, lonely, and deeply, deeply heartbroken old man, and I did not have the strength to fight a war, especially not a war against a smug, unpleasant young man who had the time, the energy, and the rule book on his side. I had made my decision, a quiet, painful surrender. I would do what they asked. I would tear up the garden. I would pull out my wife's beloved unruly roses. I would dig up her fragrant purple lavender. I would transform our small, vibrant, and beautiful patch of the world into a neat, tidy, and completely lifeless patch of suburban conformity. It would be a final and terrible betrayal of her memory. But the thought of fighting, of arguing, of the endless and petty conflict, it was a weight I simply could not bear. The Saturday before my deadline, I sat on the small stone bench in the center of the garden, the one we had bought together on our 40th anniversary. It was warm, and the garden, as if in a final, defiant act of beauty, was in full, glorious bloom. I was saying my goodbyes. I was trying to memorize the scent of the roses, the sight of the bees buzzing among the lavender, the sound of the wind rustling through the tall, wild grasses. It was in this moment of quiet, final, and personal grief that I saw them. A young woman and a little girl walking hand in hand down the sidewalk. I had seen them before, on their daily walks. The little girl always had a habit of stopping in front of my garden, her small face full of a quiet, wondrous awe. Today they stopped as they always did, but this time the young woman, a woman I did not know, looked at my beautiful, chaotic, and doomed garden. And then she looked at me, and her face was not the face of a stranger. It was the face of a person who understood. She gave me a small, sad, compassionate smile, and then she and her daughter continued on their way. I looked at the shovel and the heavy, sharp garden shears that were leaning against the side of my house, the instruments of my impending execution. Tomorrow, I had decided. Tomorrow I would begin the terrible and heartbreaking work of destroying the last living piece of my wife's soul. I had lost. The war was over. The joy was gone. I had no idea that a quiet, single mother from down the street, a woman I had never even spoken to, had just in that very moment seen the look of utter, hopeless despair on my own face, and had decided that this was one war I was not going to be allowed to surrender. Leah walked away from the old man's house, her own daughter Zoe's small hand held tightly in hers, but her mind was still back in that garden. She had seen the look on the old man's face. It was not the look of a man who was simply sad. It was the look of a man who had completely and totally given up. And it was a look she could not and would not ignore. "Mommy," Zoe asked, her own small voice a quiet, serious thing, "why did that nice man with the flowers look like he was going to cry?" "Because, sweetie," Leah had replied, a new, hard, and unfamiliar anger in her own voice, "someone is trying to take his flowers away." That evening, after she had put her daughter to bed, Leah sat at her own kitchen table, a quiet, determined warrior in a war that had not yet been declared. She had heard the rumors in the neighborhood, the whispers about the new, grumpy young man in the gray house and his complaints about the old man's jungle next door. But seeing the look on George's face had made it real. She opened her laptop and went to the neighborhood's private social media page. With a hand that was not entirely steady, she began to type. "Hello, neighbors," she wrote. "My name is Leah, and I live on Oak Street. My daughter and I, on our daily walks, have had the profound pleasure of admiring what I consider to be the most beautiful and soulful garden in our entire community, the one at Mr. George's house, on the corner." She attached a photograph she had taken of the garden a few weeks ago, a beautiful, sun-drenched shot of the chaotic and glorious explosion of color. "I learned today," she continued, "that due to a formal complaint, the Homeowners Association has ordered Mr. George to tear down this beautiful garden, this living tribute to his late wife Eleanor, or face a series of punitive fines. I believe this is a profound and deep injustice. This garden is not an eyesore. It is the heart of our neighborhood. It is a thing of beauty in a world that is too often gray and uniform. And I, for one, am not going to stand by and watch it be destroyed." She paused, her finger hovering over the post button, and then she finished. "This Saturday morning at 9 a.m., I will be at Mr. George's house with my own shovel and a bag of mulch. I am not a professional landscaper, but I am a good neighbor, and I am hoping that I will not be alone." She hit post. The reaction was a slow and then sudden and beautiful thing. The first like appeared, then another. Then the comments began to roll in. "I always thought that garden was so beautiful. I had no idea it was under threat. My own kids call it the magic flower house. This is a travesty. That new guy next door is a real piece of work. Count me in. I'll bring my lawnmower."
But Leah knew that not everyone in their quiet suburban neighborhood was on social media. So the next day, she did something she had not done since she was a teenager. She went door to door. She walked up and down the quiet, tree-lined streets of their community, and she told the story. She told the story of the lonely old man, of his late wife's beautiful garden, and of the cold, bureaucratic letter that was threatening to destroy it all. By the end of the day, she was no longer a lone voice. She was the general of a small and wonderfully committed army. An army of stay-at-home moms, of retired school teachers, of off-duty firefighters, An army of good, decent people who had just been waiting for someone to give them a reason to stand up for something. That Friday night, as she looked at the long and growing list of neighbors who had pledged to be there in the morning, she felt a profound sense of a community she had not even known existed. She looked out her own window, across the dark, quiet street towards George's house, a single, sad light on in his living room. He had no idea what was coming. He thought he was going to wake up tomorrow to face the lonely and heartbreaking task of destroying his own past, his last connection to the woman he had loved. He had no idea he was actually about to wake up to the full, beautiful, and undeniable power of his own quiet and now very, very awake neighborhood. And his grumpy and very lonely neighbor Kyle was about to get a profound and humbling lesson in what the people of this community truly valued. I woke up that Saturday morning with a heavy, leaden dread in the pit of my stomach. This was the day. The day I had to begin the slow and deeply painful execution of my own wife's memory. I sat at my small kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, and I stared out the window at her garden. It was a perfect, crisp, and beautiful autumn morning, a morning that felt like a cruel joke. The roses were in their final glorious bloom of the season, their deep crimson petals a vibrant, defiant splash of color against the cool morning air. I thought of her, of Eleanor, of the joy on her face as she would work out here, her hands covered in dirt, a smudge of soil on her cheek. This garden was not just a collection of plants, it was a living, breathing archive of our love, of our life together. And I was about to destroy it. With a sigh so heavy it felt like it was being cold from the very depths of my soul, I stood up. I went to the garage and I picked up the heavy, sharp garden shears. They felt like a weapon in my hands. I walked out into the garden to her favorite rose bush, the one she had called the old stubborn one, and I raised the shears to make the first terrible and unforgivable cut. It was then that I heard it, a strange sound for a quiet Saturday morning. Not the sound of a single car, but of many. A low, growing murmur of voices, of soft chatter, of the gentle rhythmic squeak of a wheelbarrow's wheel. I lowered the shears and looked up, my own heart a confused and suddenly anxious drum. And then I saw them. It was an army, a quiet, smiling, and beautiful army. They were walking down the street, not past my house, but towards my house. There were dozens of them. My neighbors, people I had only ever offered a polite, distant wave to. They were carrying shovels and rakes and bags of mulch, and at the head of this strange, wonderful, and utterly unbelievable procession was the young single mother from down the street, Leah and her little girl Zoe. They were carrying a large, steaming box of what smelled like fresh donuts and a giant thermos of coffee. I just stood there, in the middle of my wife's garden, the heavy, useless shears in my hand, and I stared, a man in a state of pure, unadulterated, disbelieving shock. I thought I was dreaming. I thought my own old and lonely mind had finally and completely broken. Leah walked up my driveway, her own face alight with a brilliant and wonderfully defiant smile. "Good morning, George," she said, her voice a cheerful, clear sound in the quiet morning air. "It looks like you have a bit of a project on your hands today." She gestured to the army of neighbors who were now, to my profound and utter astonishment, beginning to file into my own yard. "We thought," she said, her eyes twinkling, "that you might be able to use a little bit of help." I was speechless. I could not form a word. I just looked at her, at the sea of kind, smiling, and determined faces that were now filling my small suburban yard. She must have seen the look of pure, baffled confusion on my face, because she then explained. She told me about her post on the neighborhood's social media page. She told me about the flood of supportive comments. She told me about going door to door. She told me of the love this neighborhood, a neighborhood I had thought was just a collection of strangers, had for this small, beautiful, and chaotic patch of land. "This garden is the heart of our street, George," she said, her voice now a little softer. "It was Eleanor's gift to all of us, and we are not," she said, her voice now full of a quiet and unshakable strength, "going to let anyone take it away." And just as the full, beautiful, moving weight of what was happening began to settle over me, I saw him, my neighbor, Kyle. He had come out of his own gray and sterile house, dressed in his expensive athletic gear, clearly on his way for his morning run. He stopped dead on his perfectly manicured lawn and just stared at the scene next door, at the army of happy, laughing, and working neighbors who were now, with a joyful and purposeful energy, beginning to weed and to mulch and to save my wife's beautiful garden. I looked at the dozens of new and wonderful friends, my neighbors, who were now lovingly and protectively tending to my wife's last beautiful legacy. And then I looked across the hedge at my grumpy and now very, very confused neighbor, Kyle. He was standing all alone on his perfect, green, and completely empty lawn, a king in a silent, lonely kingdom of one. The Homeowners Association had sent me a very formal letter about the importance of community aesthetic standards. I had a strange and deeply hopeful feeling that my neighbor was about to get a real and long overdue and very beautiful lesson in what a community, a real community, truly was. The morning that had begun in a funereal silence was now a symphony of life. My garden, my sanctuary, had become the center of a community celebration I could never have imagined. The sound of laughter mixed with the sound of shovels turning the rich, dark earth. The scent of my Eleanor's roses mingled with the smell of fresh coffee and the donuts that Leah had brought. I wandered through my own yard, a dazed and grateful host at my own surprise rescue party. The people were not destroying the garden, they were healing it. They did not tear out the wild rose bushes. Instead, they skillfully pruned them, trimmed the edges, pulled the weeds with a care that was a form of love. They were finding the balance, taming the chaos, as I heard one of them say with a grin. Just enough to appease the cold, bureaucratic rules of the Homeowners Association without sacrificing the wild, beautiful soul of the place. An off-duty firefighter, a man whose house was 3 streets over, was teaching a group of children, including little Zoe, the difference between a weed and a wildflower. Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman from the yellow house who I thought could barely walk, was on her knees, planting new bulbs with a joy that made her seem decades younger. And across the hedge, on his perfect and now terribly lonely lawn, was my neighbor, Kyle. I watched him throughout the morning. At first, he stood on his porch, his arms crossed, an expression of pure, thunderous rage on his face. He was a man whose formal complaint had been answered not with compliance, but with a joyful, overwhelming, and community-wide rebellion. But as the hours passed, and the sound of our laughter and our work drifted through the air, his fury began to waver. He no longer looked angry. He looked isolated. He was observing something he did not understand. He had built a life of order, of control, of perfect surfaces, and here, next door, was chaos. A chaos of people helping each other, sharing food, building something together, not for profit, but for the simple, profound sake of decency. He was a king in his perfectly manicured kingdom of one, and he was the loneliest person on the street. The turning point came around noon. The sun was high, and we were all sweaty and tired, but happy.
It was then that the front door of Kyle's silent gray house opened. He stepped out, but he was not holding his phone to make another complaint. He was carrying a large tray. On the tray was a pitcher of iced lemonade and a stack of plastic cups. He walked hesitantly across his perfect lawn, and he stopped at the hedge. He could not meet my eye. His gaze was fixed on the ground. "It looked like you all could use this," he mumbled, his voice low and full of a shame that was almost palpable. The chatter and the work in the garden stopped. Everyone turned to look. This was the climax of the battle, and it was being fought not with anger, but with a simple glass of lemonade. I walked over to the hedge. I took a cup from the tray. "Thank you, son," I said, my own voice soft. "That was very thoughtful of you." He finally looked up, and in his eyes I did not see a villain. I saw a lonely, unhappy young man who had made a mistake. He gave me a small, hesitant nod, and then he turned and he walked back to his silent gray house. The garden, I knew in that moment, was saved. But the seed of something far more important and far more fragile, a new and unlikely friendship, had just been planted. And now, with the help of an entire neighborhood, we would have to see if it would grow. I stood by the low privet hedge, a cup of his own surprisingly good iced lemonade in my hand, and I watched as my neighbor, Kyle, walked back to his silent, gray house. He did not look back. He just disappeared inside, a quiet, solitary figure in a world of his own making. The war was over, and it had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet and deeply humbling peace offering. The rest of that Saturday was one of the most beautiful and most joyful days of my life. My yard, which had once been my own private sanctuary of grief, was now a bustling, happy hub of community. We worked, we laughed, we shared stories. I learned the names of people I had only ever known as the man with the golden retriever or the woman who jogs at 6 a.m. They were not just my neighbors, they were my friends.
By the end of the day, the garden was transformed. It was still Eleanor's garden, still a beautiful, chaotic tapestry of her favorite flowers, but it was tidier. The edges were neat. The weeds were gone. It was a perfect and beautiful compromise. A garden that was still wild at heart, but that would, I knew, now satisfy even the strictest of homeowners association guidelines. The complaint, of course, was quietly and unceremoniously dropped the following week. The story of the Great Garden Rescue, as it came to be known, had become a local legend, a quiet but powerful statement about what the people of our neighborhood truly valued. But the real transformation was not in the garden. It was in me. My house was no longer a quiet, lonely place. My newfound friends, my neighbors, would stop by just to chat, to bring me a plate of cookies, to ask for a cutting from one of Eleanor's famous rose bushes. And Leah, the kind, wonderful woman who had started it all, and her bright, beautiful daughter Zoe became regular visitors, their cheerful presence a constant, warm light in my once gray world. I was not a lonely old man anymore. I was a part of something. And the seed of that unlikely friendship, the one that had been so tentatively planted over a tray of lemonade, also, against all odds, began to grow. A week after the garden rescue, I was outside, watering the plants, when Kyle, my grumpy neighbor, appeared on his own perfect sterile lawn. He looked awkward and uncomfortable. "That rose bush," he said, pointing to the old stubborn one by the fence, It's actually quite beautiful." It was a small thing, but it was a start. The story ends on a warm, sunny afternoon a year later. I am in my garden, but I am not alone. The yard is filled with the happy, chaotic sound of my entire neighborhood. We are having our first annual Westwood Meadows Community Garden Party, and it is being held in our backyard. I am standing by the grill, a spatula in my hand, laughing at a story that the off-duty firefighter is telling me. And beside me, a look of quiet, comfortable ease on his face, is my neighbor, my friend, Kyle. He is no longer the angry, isolated man from a year ago. He is a part of this too. His own perfect, sterile lawn now has a small, chaotic, and beautiful patch of wildflowers in the corner, a patch that my wife, Eleanor, would have absolutely adored. He looks out at the crowd, at the children running through the sprinklers, at the neighbors sharing food and laughter. "You know," he says to me, his voice a low, quiet, and sincere thing, "I used to think a perfect manicured lawn was the most important thing. I used to think that was what community standards meant." He shakes his head, a small, wry smile on his face. "I was wrong. This," he says, gesturing to the beautiful, messy, and wonderfully human scene all around us, is what a real community looks like. I look at him, and then out at my garden, at this beautiful, vibrant, and living legacy of my wife's love, and I feel her with me. Her beautiful chaos had not just brought me joy, it had, in the end, brought an entire community together. The garden was not just her memory, it was a gift that had just kept on giving. An absolutely beautiful and heartwarming story about the power of a community to heal a lonely heart and to change another. What do you think of the way the neighbors all came together to save the garden? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by this incredible, feel-good story, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more uplifting and powerful stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.